Well, hot seat talk. And look, I don't want to bring it up. It ain't me bringing it up. But of course, being at Florida, the first 2 seasons under Billy Napier, whether we want to believe it or not, or whether you want it to be the case or not, all this is going to lead to hot seat talk in these preseason magazines. And this was tricky. You knew Napier would be on these lists no matter how safe his job may look on the inside from the administration. The performance so far is going to strike up the conversation whether we like it or not. I personally think that, the admin will play it safe, to many people's dismay, and it will only take a mitigated disaster to fire Billy Napier. I do think a 6-6 record is the cutoff. I think it will get questionable, but he's safe there. And if he survives, that anything worse than that, I think all bets are off. Anything worse than 6-6, all bets are off. I think anything better than that, I think we know he's safe. I know many people close to the matter say he's safe no matter what, but I do think as losses mount up in real time, I think the narrative can shift. And I think it's a lot easier to say you'll accept this than when you say it or when you see it and then try to accept it. So look, all that and the performance so far is why we see Napier on these lists. And if we look at Athlon, what they have to say about coaches on the hot seat, Billy Napier is one of 8 coaches. He's one of 8 coaches that they list on a hot seat. Napier inherited a roster in need of repair and a program that required plenty of behind-the-scenes work to get the Gators back to winning at a high level. However, patience is in short supply in the SEC. Kind of a narrative we've been hitting on. Although progress has been made in some areas, Florida is just 11-14 under Napier. The Gators are 6-10 in SEC play over the last 2 years, have made some questionable in-game coaching decisions, were dominated by rival Georgia in back-to-back meetings, and finished 23 on a 5-game losing streak. After some early optimism in recruiting, Florida's 24 signing class was hit with late decommitments and slid into 14th nationally, only adding to the building pressure on Napier going into the fall. And then Lindy's has 7 coaches on the hot seat in 2024, and Napier is second on the list with his seat described as scorching behind Arkansas coach Sam Pittman. They go on to say, quote, boosters need way more bang for their Gator bucks than 2 losing seasons, in the quote. So there you go, Will. I mean, of course, these magazines every year have a hot seat section. It is no surprise because of the first 2 seasons Billy Napier is on.
Yeah, one of these days I'm going to go back and look and see how many of the hot seat guys actually wound up getting contract extensions at the end.
How far you want to go back? Because I got the magazine dropped behind me. I can do the research. I can do the research right quick.
Well, this is good. We'll put that out as something later on this year. But look, I don't think anybody's surprised that Napier's on hot seat lists. We've been talking about it all off season, really ever since the Florida State loss, and probably since the loss against Arkansas, that Napier was going to be in trouble this year, or that Napier was going to have to deliver this year. And I don't think that's changed. The thing about all the internal folks who may not make a change is the question is, are they going to be around? Right. I mean, that's sort of been the discussion point is, you don't get to hire 3 head coaches as a athletic director most of the time. And so, everybody's going to say all the right things until it's time to put people's heads on the chopping block. And then changes will be made if the people who really make things move decide that it's time to make those sorts of changes. But I'm not really, I guess I look at it and I go, I look at it from an incentive structure perspective. Like Florida's accomplished a lot of the things that it wants to accomplish through the football program in terms of people in terms of what their public profile is, in terms of the money that they bring in, all those sorts of things. I think Florida uniquely, because of how good a school it is actually able to show more patience than some of these other schools, like in Auburn, like in Alabama, maybe even if they struggle under Kalen DeBoer. Those sorts of schools use football as a way to juice admissions. Florida doesn't really have to do that anymore. So in some ways, it's interesting that the Urban Meyer era really sort of raised Florida's profile. Florida used that along with Billy Donovan and some other things to get to a point where now you're talking about a top 5 public institution. And so the incentive structure to just churn coaches every 3 years in hopes of sort of raising the profile of your program isn't necessary as much as it is at some other places. So I think that does breed a little bit more patience. I think it probably also breeds more frustration from the fan base. But the frustration is not what drives the decision making, right? And so I think you're right. I mean, I think you look at it, and 6-6 is sort of that cutoff. Again, I think if they really struggle and Lagway comes in and is just, throwing lasers all over the place, maybe you get away with a little bit worse record than that. If Mertz plays lights out, okay, you go 7-5, but you lose 4 straight to end the year. Like, does that impact things maybe a little bit? But
well, another angle to this, we've had this discussion on Gators Breakdown Plus lately, Will, is why now is it acceptable in year 3 to accept 6-6, 7-5?
Well,
Now,
I mean, to me, it wasn't acceptable in year 1.
Right. A lot of people will point to the schedule and give that excuse. But, why are we moving the goalpost for, this head coach when, Ron Zook's following Steve Spurrier in a much better situation, gets fired after 8-8 or 8-5, 8-5, 8-5. We know the situation. Billy Napier took over, but so 6 and shouldn't you want more than 6-6 in year 3?
So it's actually a fundamental question that I think people are asking, which is that, are you better off? Do you know after 3 years that a guy's not Nick Saban? And if your only goal as a program is to find Nick Saban or to find Kirby Smart or to find Dabo Swinney or to find, Lincoln Riley or to find whoever that elite coach is, if that's your only goal and you can figure that out by year 3, then you just churn until you find that guy. Because especially in college football, the way it's set up now with the transfer portal, and if you're not recruiting at a high level anyway, or at least an elite level, and I don't think any of us can argue that Billy Napier is recruiting at an elite level. If you're not recruiting at an elite level, and with the way the transfer portal sits, the churn doesn't kill you as much as it used to. But fundamentally, I'll tell you the reason that I have any sort of hedge at all is because I don't want to be the guy who runs Billy Napier out of town and then watches DJ Lagway lift the championship trophy with Ohio State. Fundamentally, that's the thing that gives me pause, because if DJ Lagway had flipped in December, I'd be like, guys, it's over, like completely over. Like there's no possible way this program turns around. Now it's hard for me to, I'm putting some expectations on a kid that are pretty significant, but Billy Napier's done that to himself and done that to Lagway, and Lagway made the decision to come here. And so that's sort of the way that sits. And if you compare it to Ron Zook and running him off, quote unquote, after 3 years there, the difference is Chris Leak didn't have anywhere to go. And so Urban Meyer comes in, and Leak in today's day and age would have transferred anywhere else rather than sit in that offense that Dan Mullen and Urban Meyer brought, that they admit themselves he was a poor fit for, right? And now him sort of pushing through that and everybody having to stay because the transfer rules were different. In fact, Urban Meyer brought in transfers from Utah to supplement the roster as opposed to guys leaving. So it was just a completely different era of college football. And I think when Will Muschamp was fired, it was a completely different era of college football. I think when Jim McElwain was fired, it was a completely different era of college football. And even I think you'd make the argument that when Dan Mullen was fired, it was a completely different era of college football. And so this era right now, like the taste that Gator fans are going to have in their mouths, if DJ Lagway's hoisting a trophy someplace else, like the argument you're going to have, the risk management, you sit there and go like, fear of missing out, all that sort of stuff. It's all that, if I'm an administrator, if I'm a booster, if I'm somebody like that, do I want to look and see him raise a trophy someplace else? Now you could make the argument that he's raising the trophy someplace else because he went to a place that's got a better program, a better coach, and a better recruiting profile, all that sort of stuff. You can make that argument. But to me, that's the fear, right? The fear is that the best player that Billy Napier's recruited needs to have an opportunity to actually set foot on the field before we really evaluate whether Billy Napier is the right guy. Now, the fact that he's coming in the third recruiting cycle is a problem in terms of how quickly things accelerate and how quickly we make these judgments. But, that to me is the only reason that people are hedging on where Florida needs to be, because you're right. 6-6 in Gainesville, like 6-6 is mildly acceptable at South Carolina. 6-6 is extension eligible at Vanderbilt. 6-6 is we throw you out the door at Florida. That's sort of the way it's always been historically. And, I don't know there will be a whole lot of patience with another 6-6 year from the fan base. But again, I go back to what are Florida's goals? What are the administration's goals? What's the UAA's goals? And are those aligned with necessarily churning out 12-1 seasons? That's an open question and something that I think we'll get an answer to at the end of the year, depending upon what the results on the field look like.